Hey folks, welcome back to Mertin Hyundai. This is my office. And the reason I'm sitting in my office today is I want to talk about some common questions that I get about electric vehicles and want to maybe answer those common questions so that I don't have to answer every single person every time they ask the question, but maybe I can just show them this video. That would help immensely. So when it comes to electric vehicles, there are a lot of common questions that have to do with things like range, where to charge, how often to charge, what the speed of the charge is, etc., 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 etc. So I'm going to address those individually, but also some myths about electric vehicles that I'd like to address as well. So the most common question is how far can the car go? Well, Hyundai has two different types of electric vehicles. We have the Hyundai Ioniq, which is an average range of about 200 kilometers, and the Hyundai Kona, which is an average range of 415 kilometers. The Ioniq's range varies from about 150 to about 250, depending on the climate. So if it's really cold out, like we're talking, minus 20, minus 30 degrees, the range can drop down to about 150 kilometers. But if it's nice and warm, mild climate, 23, 24 degrees, and you're driving around, combination of city and highway, it's not unexpected to get about 250 kilometers. As a matter of fact, on a test of the Ioniq in Seoul, Korea, they were able to get 350 kilometers of driving time before the battery warning light came on. So that was that was pretty spectacular. So the Kona, similarly, will have its ups and downs as well. In the winter, it's going to go down probably about 340, 350 kilometers, and in the summer, mild city driving, people have done over 500 kilometers. So it varies wildly. So, next question would be, well, what happens when my battery when it dies, when it can no longer charge properly? Well, that's a concern that really you don't need to worry about. These batteries are spectacular. Hyundai uses a lithium-ion polymer battery technology, which is one of the best in the industry, from LG Chemistry. They're a battery pack. They're not a cylindrical cell. They're a pack. They're very thin. They can be easily and quickly cooled. And the Ioniq and the Kona both have actively cooled battery systems. Battery temperature management system in our vehicles is second to none. They're spectacular. To give you an idea, the Nissan Leaf, which has had probably the most trouble with battery degradation, has no active cooling. It's simply a passively cooled battery. So the Ioniq has an air-cooled battery system. Actively cooled, air-cooled. Basically, it's running cool air past the battery, through the battery, cooling it down, or raising the temperature in the winter to give you that little bit of extra range. The Kona uses fluid instead, so it's actually using a glycol solution, just like the antifreeze in your car, in your gas car. It's able to cool and warm the battery when necessary. So that helps battery longevity. What else helps battery longevity? Well, the Ioniq and the Kona both use a lithium-ion polymer technology. That polymer is a gel electrolyte, and it reduces the overall dendrite buildup in the battery between the anode and cathode, which is a common failure of lithium-ion batteries. So definitely a good battery pack, good battery temperature management. You may have also heard that batteries shouldn't be discharged completely and shouldn't be charged completely to 100%. Thankfully, most electric cars, actually I think all electric cars, don't actually allow the charging system to do that. Our vehicles never charge to 100% and never discharge down to 0%. They try to keep it in that sweet spot. Extends a little outside the sweet spot, but even with that, the degradation is so slow, so minor that you can own these cars for 10, 20 years and really not lose that much battery power or range. And it's still going to be a very usable vehicle 20 years down the road. Even vehicles with the worst degradation, like older Nissan Leafs, their battery is not nearly what it was when it was new, but it's still a usable vehicle, right? You're not going to suddenly get rid of a vehicle just because it doesn't go exactly 130 kilometers. If it goes 80 kilometers, it's still a very usable vehicle. For most people, most of our day-to-day trips are within about 40 or 50 kilometers anyway. That brings me to my next gripe and question that people have. What's the vehicle with the best range? Do I need the vehicle with the best range? Actually, they don't even ask the question. No, they're just immediately assuming that they want to have the best range vehicle. That is the wrong approach. What you want to do is you want to get a vehicle that suits your range requirements 99% of the time. So if you work 100 kilometers away from home, great. Get something that has more than a 200 kilometer range, because there's chances are you'll be doing some errands outside of work, that sort of thing. So Hyundai Kona, for instance, would be great for that. If you're running errands all day, or you're an Uber driver or taxi driver or delivery driver, the Hyundai Kona is a spectacular vehicle, because most of your driving needs will be taken care of throughout the day without having to worry about range. If your day-to-day commute is, say, within 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers, get an Ioniq, or get an approachable or equivalent vehicle to the Ioniq. There are some reasons to go with an Ioniq over those other competitors, as are the reasons for the Kona. But I'll explain that later. But if your range requirements on a day-to-day basis are within 150 kilometers, stick with an Ioniq. And the reason for that is not just because it's cheaper. It is. It's about $10,000 less than the Kona, trim to trim. But you're also not dragging around a big, heavy battery that you don't need most of the time. Would you drive around with a full tank of gas all the time and always fill it up to full? No. When it's down to an eighth of a tank, that's when you finally get gas again. But if you're at a quarter tank or a half a tank, you're not freaking out about, I need to get more gas. No, you're going to do that when you actually need to get gas. Otherwise, dragging around a big full tank of gas all the time is just a waste of gas. And it's the same thing with an electric car. There's no point in dragging around the heavy extra battery if you're not actually using it. So getting a vehicle with the most range is not as important as getting a vehicle that suits your day-to-day needs. So, next thing to talk about. Electric vehicles are too expensive. Well, that's not necessarily true anymore. Considering gas prices, now I'm in lower BC, so considering gas prices here, we're topping out at downtown Vancouver $1.70 a liter. Come on, that's crazy. So depending on how much you drive, that $1.70 a liter every month could rack up your fuel costs $300, $400, $500 a month. That's getting pretty close to an EV car payment. Hydro is super cheap. You could drive 100 kilometers per day for 22 days of the month and only spend about $50 on hydro every month. Not only that, but nowadays with the government incentives, and especially the new government incentive coming out from the federal government of an additional $5,000, a total of $10,000 off, and most states, provinces will now have some sort of EV incentive, and it definitely makes a difference. So your mileage may vary, no pun intended, but essentially depending on where you live, there's a good chance owning an electric car will be equally as expensive as a gas vehicle, and potentially less expensive. I know for me, when I bought mine, I bought it because it would be less expensive. Okay, let's go down to the next thing that bugs me. Sorry, I've written these down. Okay, maintenance cost. Well, how much is it going to cost to maintain an electric car? Well, good news. Electric cars require very, very, very little maintenance, and when they do require maintenance, it's cheap. The first major maintenance on a Kona or an Ioniq is a gear reduction oil replacement, or gear reduction oil fluid change, and that is at 192,000 kilometers. Enough said. Brakes are going to last you God knows how long. So the other question is, well, how often am I going to change brakes? Is regenerative braking using my brake pads, etc.? No regenerative brake pads. Our regenerative braking is being done by the motor, not the brake pads. Brake pads have nothing to do with it. That's a friction brake. The motor is actually essentially working as a generator, which is causing magnets to slow you down, essentially. That's the easiest way to explain it. Anyway, my manager's staring at me. So, moving along. Alright, so EV batteries won't last long. They'll eventually wind up in landfills. Not necessarily. They do last long, and they are fully recyclable. All lithium-ion batteries are recyclable. And actually, the lithium batteries that come out of a lot of these older electric vehicles, not only are they either being disassembled and reused for their base components, they're even being used for things like solar grids and stuff like that. So the batteries aren't being disassembled, they're just continually being used, which is pretty good. Okay, so the power grid won't be able to handle the hundreds of thousands of EVs expected down the road. BS. Okay, so biggest problem with that statement is that electric companies, basically they have an amount of power that they need for day-to-day usage. At night, our usage drops significantly. The amount of power that we're using on our grid during the day is tens of times more than what we use at night. So most EVs are going to be charged at night. So if the overall amount of power that all of our EVs are using is about the same as the overall amount of power we use during the day anyway, then we'll be fine. Okay. So according to a report conducted by Navigant Research, the nation can add millions of electric cars to the current power system without having to, well, this is the US, but honestly in Canada we don't have any problem either, without having to build any new power plants. Much of this has to do with the fact that most electric vehicles tend to be charged at night, as I mentioned, during off-peak hours when power demand tends to be the lowest. So definitely not a problem there. All right. I think that's it for now. I'm going to come up with another video pretty soon in regards to the charging of the system, what best way to charge the vehicles, what sort of charging adapters are required in the home, that sort of thing. So stay tuned for the next video. I think that pretty much covers all the questions there. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.